Welcome back to 15th Street Automotive. Last week I did a video on a 2020 Canyon ABS module or ABS light on the dash. We fixed that, had a bad ground, but while I was in there I noticed that the PCM had a P0018 code stored in it. That is a cam crank correlation on bank 2. So we're going to go ahead and diagnose that code. That way we can keep the customer informed of any problems they might have and maybe head something off before it gets more serious. So we'll diagnose this thing and figure out what's wrong. So as you can see, the check engine light's not on, but when I was in this thing looking at the ABS problems, I noticed that the P0018 was stored. That's the cam crank correlation code for bank 2 intake. Had a stored code in there, but no check engine light. So I thought that was kind of weird, but so what I did was I just cleared the codes, went out and did an extensive road test, and when I came back, I had a P0019 code in there. The P0018 didn't come back, but the P0019 did, which is bank 2 exhaust camshaft correlation. So whatever our problem is on bank 2 of the of this 3.6. We're not getting any codes for the bank 1, which would be a P0016 or a P0017. So we need to probably road test this thing and record. There's a PID in here called camshaft variation, and it has that PID for each cam, and we can see which cams are out of variance from the desired to the actual, and it gives you a degree PID. But let's look up the code criteria for that P0018 and P0019, figure out how much variation we're allowed before it sets the code, and then we'll go road test this thing watching those PIDs. Alright, so if I go in here for our codes, so P0018, crankshaft position not plausible bank 2, and then 19 is exhaust camshaft not plausible bank 2. So what I want to know is our conditions for running it. So basically engine running, and conditions for setting right here. Deviation of the relative camshaft position is greater than -9 degrees in one direction or greater than 9 degrees in the other direction. So plus or minus 9 degrees. So what I suspect is we've got both cams on the bank 2 are out of variation more than 9 degrees. That's why it intermittently sets that code. So what's weird is to have it on both cams on one bank and not the other bank kind of makes me want to think we might have we could have two solenoids that are getting weak or plugged up, or it could be the VVT solenoids, it could be oil passages to that head are both are plugged, and that's why both cams are showing variations, excessive variations. It could be both phasers are starting to go bad, but because it's both cams and bank 1 isn't doing anything or showing any problem, kind of makes me think that maybe we got a stretched chain. The reason I say that is because this is the way the bank 2 is the driver's head on this thing. So this is the chain for bank 2, comes off the crank, goes up over the intake, over the exhaust, and then back down to the crank. The exhaust side shoe, as we'll call it, the guide, is fixed. It doesn't move. The intake side has the shoe, but it also has the tensioner there. So what happens is, this is just a suspicion for me, but if that chain stretches, it's going to be more evident on the intake side of that chain, on the intake gear side, and then the chain goes across for the intake to the exhaust. So it's going to show symptoms of stretch, but it's going to be the intake is going to be much more magnified. The variations are going to be magnified because we got this long stretch of chain that can stretch. We got this long, many more links that can show stretch in between the crank and in the intake versus in between the intake and the exhaust. So the intake is going to show symptoms of a stretched chain much more than the exhaust, although they're both going to show it. So we're going to go drive this thing, and I'll record it. I'm not going to take the camera with me on the test drive because it's a pain in the butt trying to keep the camera steady, and it falls over, and then I'm watching the camera, and so that's just not a good idea. I'm just going to record it on the scan tool. My Autel has a really good record feature, and then we'll review that when I get back from a road test. All right, so I just got back from the road test. Got a recording of it that kind of tells the story I kind of expected to see. So this thing on acceleration, you could see spikes on the intake cam bank 2 and the exhaust cam bank 2. Those are the lime green and the red traces on here. So if you look at this thing, I'm just going to play this. Now, first of all, this blue one, which is bank 1 exhaust, it went high, but if you look at the scaling, it's only three bars, or 3% right there, or 3 degrees. I'm sorry, 3 degrees. Whereas this lime green one here, which is our suspect cam bank 2, it's up about 9%. This one here is definitely 9%. Right there is that's your code right there, plus or minus 9%. The dark green and the blue are bank 1, but the scaling is different for that. So I'm going to play this, and we'll see. See right there, that one right there is probably about 10% or 10 degrees. That's a high blue, but it's only a 3 degrees. There's another 10% or 10 degrees. Dang it, why do I keep saying percent? So this was just a 20-minute road test I took. Okay, right there, that went off the scale at 11 degrees. So it's pretty evident that our problem is with that intake cam on bank 2. And if you remember how that chain is set up, it's going to be more evident on, see, there's another one that went on. That one up to 12. Now our scale has even changed to 12 degrees now instead of 11, and it peaked out there. But even this red one here is exhaust. It's hitting, 6%, 6 degrees. Yep, there's no, that one went up to 14 degrees. Let me push this a little faster here. There's 20. Okay, so if we stop that there, that is 20 degrees on the intake cam bank 2, and this red one here is exhaust cam on bank 2. It went up to 12, so that's where our P0018 came from. Start this again and look. So that one there, okay, so it only went up to 4. It looks high, but the scaling is off. So right here, let's see here, this flat area right here, I was stopped, and everything kind of settles down, and there's no pressure on it, so everything went down to 0 variation. So as soon as I accelerated again, then we start getting our variation. So that red one is our exhaust. That's a P0018 code. It went up to 9. Here's this one here went up to probably 10. That explains our P0018 code. I'm curious as to why our I'm dragging it back here now. I want to look at that those super high peaks of the intake cam. So I'm gonna pause that there. So this right here, as you can see, the scale is 20 degrees, and it hit the top of that. What I'm curious as to why the P0018 didn't reset. It's clearly worse than the exhaust, which set the P0019. But I think the next thing to verify what's happening here, we can do a cam crank scope pattern, correlation scope pattern, where we look at the crankshaft position sensors and both bank 2 camshaft position sensors on the scope, and we might be able to see something kind of like a second arrow in the target there for solenoid timing chains. But I'm pretty sure our problem is timing chains based on the way the chain is set up and how it drives, the direction it drives. I'm pretty sure our problem is just a stretch chain, and it's not uncommon on these engines to have stretch chains. But do like to have an extra couple of arrows in the target to prove to ourselves that that's our problem. So let's pull out the Pico. Alright, so we need to find a schematic for our cam and crank sensors. Powertrain management. There we go. Okay, so on this particular engine, I'll show you here in a second, but the camshaft, the bank 2 that we're concerned with is covered by the intake, so I don't have access to the camshaft sensors. At the sensors, I have to go to the PCM. So here's our camshaft sensor bank 2 exhaust, camshaft sensor bank 1, camshaft sensor. Okay, so these two are camshaft sensors, and here's our crank sensor. So this is the connector that we're interested in on the vehicle to gain access to those. So let me print this out. Landscape. So I'm going to print this out, and then we'll go to the car and try and find that the ECM connector. Okay, so our PCM is back there in the corner there. This is the schematic for it. The circuits that we're interested in, there's the crankshaft position sensor, we're looking for, so pin 7, we're looking for pin 4, and we're looking for pin 20 of the ECM connector 3. So the nice thing about GM PCMs is they got it stamped on the body of the PCM which connector is which, and this top one is our connector 3. So it's kind of cool, makes it easy. We just need to get in here and get this thing opened. Okay, it's almost impossible to see here. I can barely see it. I'm close right up to it. So this is pin 1 right here in the corner. Up here is pin 53. So the pins we want are 7, 4, and 20. So if we count over 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, and then 8, 9, 10, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So it's 4, the one right next to 4, and then 7 are the pins we want for both bank 2 cams and the crankshaft sensor. So if we spin this over, our wires that we want are green, which is pin 4 is yellow. It's right there. Pin 20 is right next to it. Well, that's going to be a pain in the butt to get to. All right, so I went with piercers because the back probes wouldn't allow me to use the to close the clamp on this thing. As it is, it's just barely closed with the piercers on there. So we don't have a problem with corrosion up here like other people do. So in the country, so we can get away with piercing. I'll put a little liquid tape on there when I'm all done. But we'll get the Pico scope hooked up on this thing. I'm probably gonna have to put this cover back on so I can run it. Let's get the Pico hooked up and go from there. So I'd put the cover back on. It won't run smooth at all with it off. So got my Pico hooked up. So I'll get it started up. I'll set up the scope, and then I'll bring you guys in, and we'll see what we have for scope patterns. Okay, here's the solenoids right here. If we unplug these things, okay, so those things disconnected. Now we can run this thing and the computer won't adjust the phasers. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to show you what I found on this, which points us to a timing chain issue. These are printouts of the Pico. It's hard. I'm not great on the some of the features of the Pico. I can use it for diagnostic purposes, but like saving patterns and then bringing them back up, I get lost in the menu. So I'm an old guy, so sometimes old technology is what I like, and I like to have printed out paper. So this is how I'm going to explain this. This is an idle setting. This is a snap throttle setting, and we can find our problem in these two patterns. So at idle, with the VVTs disconnected, the cam tooth, rising edge of that intake cam tooth is 9 degrees or 9 teeth before the sync on an idling engine. 9 teeth, each tooth is 6 degrees. Doesn't matter that it's 54 degrees before that cam. I don't care about that. That's not what we're after right now. What I am after here is on a snap throttle. This is the snap throttle. You can see it's tighter. Everything's a little smaller because it got a little faster. Frequency changed. That rising cam tooth is now 8 teeth before that sync. So it retarded one tooth. One tooth is 6 degrees. When we were road testing that vehicle and we had the variation graphing up, it would bounce up to 20, but generally it was sitting around 6 or 7, 8 or 9 degrees retarded, or the variation was 6 to 8 degrees between actual and desired. So this is indication that it is in the chain, and it is in the slop of that chain on bank 2. So this scope pattern shows that it retarded 6 degrees on that snap. As soon as it goes back to idle, it relaxes and goes back to that 9 teeth or 54 degrees. We kind of already knew we had a bad chain, but this is proof of it for sure, proof positive. I thought I'd show you these printouts, kind of make it a little easier. It's easier for me to see this. I made some markings on here so you can kind of see it, but it works for me.